Let's get to our next guest as we count down to the noon inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump. Now we are joined by Republican Senator David Perdue of Georgia, which I was saying before during the commercial break. I've gotten to see a lot of you down in Georgia. I know we were joking about it being a swing state that has swung towards Donald Trump. And then I saw you again right here in the Capitol recently. When you think about the 1, 2, 3 sort of the things that are going to happen over the next 100 days, do you think there is going to be a sort of ladder to this, or you really think it's all at one shot?
Well, you'll see some regulatory changes with possibly executive orders, some congressional review acts that we'll do. But job one is getting the economy going, getting people back to work. So you'll see all this work on Obamacare first. Then there'll be the tax package that'll follow that. And following both of those will be the work to get the economy going. And
you think it's Obamacare before the tax piece?
I do. Yeah, I think so. We're working on that right now.
Right. I mean, when you look at what the market and investors have looked at over the past couple of months, it's a tax story,
yes,
right?
Sir.
Everybody expects the taxes to come down. Steve Mnuchin, who was on our show the day he announced he was becoming the Treasury Secretary, he committed, by the way, on the set to 15% on the corporate rate.
He did.
He did. What do you think the rate ultimately is, and how do you get there?
Well, you can't talk about nominal rate. You have to talk about effective rate. And so if we're going to reduce our corporate tax rate, which, by the way, most of the rest of the world has already done, you have to talk about corporate welfare and get the deductions in balance, too. Stop the federal government from picking winners and losers. So I think personally, I think 15 to 20% in the 16, 17, 18% range in there will make us competitive with the rest of the world.
And given your experience in business, where do you stand on the border adjustment tax?
Well, I'm concerned about it. Listen, I applaud the work that the House is doing on that. I know you're going to have Congressman Brady on later today, but in my view, it's regressive. I mean, it just hammers low-income and middle-income consumers, and it really doesn't foster growth. Frankly, it's a Schumer tax. It's what he talked about in the early 2000s.
What's the alternative? If you don't have it, the math makes it much more complicated, and that's a euphemism to get down to the 15 to 20% rate that you're talking
Andrew,
about.
That's a great question. It makes it difficult in this town. This town looks at that modeling quite differently than the rest of the world. I trust the free enterprise system, and frankly, that's what other countries did. The UK reduced their corporate tax rate from 28 to 18. They got rid of their repatriation tax, which are the two things we need to do, and their economy boomed. And so I believe that's what we need to do here first.
You're talking about scoring it based on economic growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a dynamic issue, which I don't think in this case anyone's going to debate about, given that the Republicans control the House and the Senate. But the other issue then becomes whether you think it's going to be revenue neutral long term.
Well, I do personally.
Even with the
if you don't
even at those low numbers, there are people I know inside the administration who think that's tough.
Well, here's the problem. If you put an individual tax change and clean up that tax code, if you go to the corporate tax rate, you do the repatriation, and now we want to put a tariff on here as well, or this border adjustment tax, we're putting four things together in one package. I believe we ought to debate each one individually. It's a collective impact, though, I agree, that we need to look at.
Is there support for that way of thinking on the Hill? Or?
Well, I hope so. There's only one Fortune 500 in all of CEO and all of Congress, so I'm trying to make that argument right now to slow this thing down to where we can really look at it. We have past precedents of this around the world, and we know what happens. In Europe, for example, I lived there when they were putting the VAT in, and what it did is it caused bigger government. It's a tax grab, basically.
That's the one area where there's not a lot of cohesion among Republicans.
That's right. Well, we'll get to that. I mean, this is an open debate. That's what we should be having right now, and we've got time to do that. I just met Kevin Brady in the green room, and we're going to get together and talk about that. And there are a lot of other knowledgeable people about this topic.
To the extent that you are generally optimistic about where all this goes, what are you worried about?
I worry about interest rates. I worry about our debt. Right now, if we're successful, we'll get the economy going. Right now, the bond market is already anticipating growth. Interest rates are bubbling up, and what's going to happen is, with this debt size we have, we'll be paying much more interest, and that really concerns me in the short term.
And so why is that not a concern for you, though, when we get to the dynamic scoring issue?
Oh, it absolutely is. But if you have to look at this over a planning period and make sure that it balances out, repatriation tax is a big deal. We have almost $7 trillion not at work in this economy right now because of overregulation and uncertainty coming out of this town. You free up some of that capital, and by the way, that's equity, and it will get leveraged up a little bit, and so it'll be much bigger than what we're thinking about right now, and that's not what's not being considered in this equation.
When I can hear people at home that maybe have different political views saying, talking about getting this economy going again, talking about getting people, back in the employment sector. We're at 4.7%. We've had an 8-year or 7-year recovery. They think that it's disingenuous to say that the economy is not not
So let me
Stealing
give
my
you some
line,
facts.
Joe. You're stealing my
I know
line.
I am.
Joe,
I
I mean-
said people at home, people here.
Look, this is a hard-nosed business guy observation. The compound annual growth of this economy over the last 8 years under this president is 0.61%, compound on a per capita basis, which is the way you look at it. That's the lowest growth of any president in our history. Number two, right now, if you take unemployed, underemployed, and people who are just giving up looking for work, it's a big number. That's what just happened in this election. I mean, Republican turnout in the primary season was up over 60%. It's never happened before. What drove that is this disenfranchisement of the workforce.
How do you measure success?
Success right now is getting people back to work. I want to see a 3 or 4% GDP growth, but it's not going to happen in year one. That's the other worry I have, is we have maybe a little bit of an over-expectation. This is a heavy lift that we have. We have to undo a lot of regulatory things that are just killing this economy right now.
At 3.5%, wages go up. There was a period where we grew at about 3.2%, and Europe grew at 2% for 30 years.
Yep.
And the average American was 40% better off, richer, able to spend spending power because of that. And we've lost that. We've lost the advantage. We're growing like Europe now. But the question is whether it's demographics and productivity and other things that are different now,
Technology.
and it's technology, and we're unable to get back there.
It's a combination of those things, but one of the biggest things is the rest of the world created an unlevel playing field while we were asleep here at the switch politically. They lowered their corporate tax rates, they simplified their tax codes, and they became much more productive.
Very quickly, Senator, can I just ask you, you point out that interest rates are bubbling up. Do you worry that the Fed's behind things and will have to raise rates more quickly than the market's anticipating at this point?
Well, that's what happens when you start growing. Demand for capital grows and interest rate rise. But when you have $20 trillion, we're the largest borrower in America. And so we've got to start giving the private sector some hope that we're going to finally address that debt question.
Producers are going to kill us because we got to go. But what did you make of Donald Trump's comments about a strong dollar, or in this case, a lack of a strong dollar?
Liking week.
Well, I mean, what he wants is he wants to get exports up.
Right.
And I do too.
But this is one of the first times you've ever heard a president or anyone in any presidential administration say, you know what, actually, maybe we don't want.
Andrew,
they might have thought that,
yeah.
but from a policy perspective in terms of what they say publicly.
We've talked about this. This guy's an outsider. He's a business guy. He wants results. When you break eggs in a place like this, it's not going to be pretty.
Senator, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.